Hey, what is going on, guys? Over South here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the jungle tier list for the Worlds patch 8.19. So first up here, we have a new champion entering the S tier for this patch, and it's Kha'Zix. So Kha'Zix really did not need buffs, but because of the championship skin and because Riot does want to be selling a lot of that, I think that's the main reason to why he got buffed in this patch. I just don't see another reason as to why he would need a buff, because I think he was in a pretty balanced state in the previous patches, but because of the buffs he got this patch, he's now S tier. He's your best AD assassin jungler that you can play for 8.19. Dark Harvest is what most players are running on their Kha'Zix now in this patch. A few are still going for Electrocute, but Dark Harvest is just gonna outscale the Electrocute by a mile. It's only going to be in the early game, or in the very early game, to where Electrocute is gonna provide you with a little bit more damage, but once you reach the mid to late game there, the Dark Harvest is just gonna provide you with a ton more damage, and it's going to make your one-shot combo even better. So second in the S tier for this patch is going to be Evelynn. So Evelynn's another really good jungler right now with the Dark Harvest. With the Electrocute nerfs a while back, more and more players are going Dark Harvest right now on Evelynn, and it is doing much better than Electrocute. So if you have yet to swap over from Electrocute to Dark Harvest, then I would definitely recommend it. In my opinion, she is your best AP assassin for 8.19. She's been really good for the past few patches now. I just think that Evelynn is overall a very consistent pick for solo queue, because her one-shot combo once she gets 2 to 3 items is pretty brain dead for the most part. It doesn't take a ton of skill to just land your charm. You don't need to land a single skill shot, and you can one-shot a squishy target. So in the mid to late game, if the enemy team does have a fed carry, then if you're able to take them out, which is pretty easy to do, then you're gonna have a lot of success on Evelynn. And then one thing to note here for the room page on Evelynn, most high elo Evelynn players and most experienced Evelynn players are running Absolute Focus instead of Celerity now. Celerity did get nerfed a few patches back, and Absolute Focus on assassins is actually really good, because especially on Evelynn, when you're going for your one-shot combo, you're going to be above 70% HP pretty much all the time. So the extra damage there from the Absolute Focus just makes your one-shot and your burst combo that much better. So another really good solo carry jungle pick for this patch is Shaco. So Shaco is basically the AD version of Evelynn, in the sense that once you get like 2 items on Shaco, once you get some Dark Harvest stacks going, your ability to one-shot that squishy target in the mid game is really easy to do. His one-shot combo is pretty easy to execute, so if you can get ahead early, especially with Shaco, get to your item spikes pretty quickly, then your ability to take over games and just catch enemies out with your stealth when they're just farming randomly or out of position is really good. Another really good thing about Shaco is that you don't have to start the same camp every game. You don't have to start bot side camp and get a leash from your bot lane. Your pathing can be really creative, and it can depend on what you're looking to do and what your team's strengths are. If your bot lane does have a ton of CC and you're going to be able to get a successful gank off early game, then you can either level 2 gank bot after red buff, you can start your top side camp and then path down to bot lane. If your top lane has really good kill pressure early, then you can start bot side and path up there. So I just really like that Shaco, he doesn't have to start his same camp every single game. He can really clear to his team's strengths. So a jungler that Riot refuses to nerf and has been S tier for the past 2 or 3 months now, Graves, is going to be S tier for another patch here. So Graves just really doesn't have any weaknesses right now. His early game strong, his mid game strong. He also scales pretty well into the late game, so you can't really exploit Graves at any point in the game. His early clear is just so good. He's going to stay healthy in the jungle. His ability to contest Scuttle Crab is super good in the early game. Once he does get Warrior and Stormrazor and some Dark Harvest stacks, his one-shot combo becomes extremely good, and it's just super easy to start taking over games with Graves once you do hit that mid-game spike. And now for those runes on Graves, pretty much all pro junglers, all high elo junglers have now swapped over to the Dark Harvest on Graves. Last patch, some junglers were still running Fleet Footwork, and it's still not a bad option on Graves, but the Dark Harvest there just allows you to carry games a lot better, especially once you do reach the mid game. It just adds to your one-shot combo, which is really good for Graves. So next up here is going to be Ramus, and Ramus is going to be my low elo pick for this patch. I'm going to be adding in a high elo pick and a low elo pick for the patches to come here because I just want to make it clear that a champion like Ramus, once you do get up into the ranks, I do think he can be outclassed by a lot of junglers, but Ramus right now for most elos, I think he is a very strong jungle pick. In the lower elos, you have champions like Lee Sin, Kayn, Kha'Zix, Rengar being played a ton in this patch, and if you can play Ramus, if you can reach your 2 items on him and you're playing up against those heavy AD compositions, then you're going to have a ton of success on him. And because games do usually drag out a lot more in the lower elos and the early game is not as important, Ramus can be a super good pick there. If you do go for the Moby Boots Righteous Glory on Ramus, then your ability to just take over the mid game I think is really good and it's some of the best for any jungler in the game. If you do notice that the enemy team has someone just randomly in the side lane and your team is grouped up, your ability to just press go on Ramus, go for that engage, get the taunt off on the enemy and just burst someone out is really good, and you can just find picks super well with this build on Ramus, which is why I do think it's really good. And lastly here, to round out the S tiers, is going to be the high elo pick, and it's Taliyah. So if you can play Taliyah well, I think she is one of the strongest junglers for this patch. Her ability to just take over the early game is some of the best for any jungler. Her single target clear early is really good. She can contest scuttle better than most junglers in the game, and your ability to just get around the map with your passive, be in so many different places as once is great with Taliyah, and you can just really snowball the early game with her if you can play her well. And then for the rune setup there on Taliyah, I do have Dark Harvest on screen. You can still run Electrocute. It is still a very good option on Taliyah. A lot of Korean and a lot of Chinese junglers are starting to run Dark Harvest though on their Taliyah, and it seems to be a trend with a lot of these Electrocute junglers from the past. Because Electrocute did get nerfed a few patches ago, more and more players are just experimenting with the Dark Harvest, and it actually does have a better win percent than Electrocute on Taliyah for this patch, so you can still run both, still are really good on her right now, but Dark Harvest is definitely a good option for her in this patch. So for tier 2 or A tier in this patch, I did move Nocturne down out of S tier from the last time I did a jungle tier list. With Kha'Zix getting buffed in this patch and with Evelynn and Shaco also being very good assassin picks, I do think that Nocturne does get outshined a little bit now, and he's no longer one of the best assassins that you can play for 8.19. I did also move Udyr down into A tier for this patch. I do still think that if you can play a good Udyr, if you can play his early game well, then he can be an S tier pick, but I think that right now there's a lot of other junglers that have good early games but also scale really well in the mid to late game, and they're not as risky of a pick as Udyr. So champions like Taliyah, Graves, Kha'Zix, Shaco, they can all have pretty good early to mid games, but they're also still going to be good threats in the late game, whereas with Udyr, you kind of have to snowball early game or else you're pretty useless in the mid to late game there. So I do still think he's a good pick, but there are going to be more consistent junglers for 8.19. And then I am moving Elise up into A tier for this patch. She got directly buffed with the E changes, and then she got indirectly buffed with the Leandry's buffs for 8.19. So with those two changes combined, I do think it's enough to bump Elise up into A tier, and you can have some pretty good success with her for 8.19. So tier 3 here is looking pretty much the same from the last time I did a jungle tier list. I did end up moving Jarvan up to B tier. I had Jarvan in C tier in previous patches, but with the buffs he got in this patch, they're helping him out a little bit. They're not helping him out a ton though, so I originally thought that with the buffs he would jump up to A tier, but that's not the case. He's still performing pretty mediocre right now in this patch, and there's definitely other junglers that are still doing much better than him. So for tier 4 or C tier for this patch here, these junglers are picks that I would look to stay away from if you're looking to climb in solo queue. A lot of these picks here are more supportive jungler picks, and they do more so rely on their team in order for you to win with them. If your team does not do well, if you're not able to get your team ahead in the early game, then your ability to solo carry with these champions is very low compared to champions above them in the tier list. So unless you're like a one trick of these champions here, then I would be trying to stay away from them in this patch. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. That was the jungle tier list for patch 8.19. Hopefully this does help you out, and hopefully it does give you a pretty good idea of what you should be looking to prioritize in this patch. So if you guys did enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.